For the purposes of this vlog, you have to understand at least one thing about me. I am an absolute nut about fairy tales. I adore them. I was lucky enough to have parents who read to me from a very early age, and fairy tales and folk tales featured prominently at story time. I became obsessed with them. I would search out collections of fairy tales and retellings of classic tales and even fractured fairy tales. In fact, my very first book report was on Robin McKinley's Beauty, her debut novel, and it is this gorgeous retelling of Beauty and the Beast. I read it with my mom, and at the risk of sounding cliche and cheesy, the rest is history. When I made it to 10th grade, my English teacher spent an inordinate amount of time on things like archetypes and cliches and other such literary mumbo-jumbo. I began to apply that to my reading of fairy tales, and lucky for me, I didn't begin to hate them, which has happened to a lot of people when applying things like that. You know, people reading books in their English classes, sometimes it gets you to hate them because you have to analyze them and pick over them. But for me, I don't know how or why, but I loved looking at the fairy tales that way. I would look at the archetypes and, the threads that were similar in different fairy tales and, like the animals that help, the helpful animals and everything, and then magic shoes. I mean, shoes are a big thing. I don't know why, but they are. And then people transforming into animals. There's just lots of great stuff. I also went through a period in my life where I was so mad at Disney for ruining all the fairy tales because they weren't true to the source material. When I actually sat down and thought about it, though, that's completely ridiculous because what they're doing is basically fractured fairy tales. I love fractured fairy tales. I love it when people take a fairy tale and put their own spin on it, put it in a different time period, look at what the characters are actually thinking and all that. And to just be mad at Disney for doing exactly that is silly. I mean, I can choose not to like their version of it, but to be mad at them on the principle that they're not true to the source material is silly. For example, one of the oldest versions of Cinderella we have is a Chinese version. And in that one, Cinderella's mom ends up dying and being reincarnated as a fish, a magical fish and everything, and then the stepmother kills her and everything, and then the Cinderella character keeps the bones, and they're magical and help her get to the... I mean, really, and you're looking at me now going, what? Cinderella's mom was a fish? But, yeah. Anyway, fairy tales are more of a living organism. They change every time someone tells them. They have been doing this for hundreds and hundreds of years. This has happened, and there ends up being versions of the story in completely different areas of the world because people retell them and other versions happen and everything. I do have one bone to pick with Disney, though. I think that their version of the Black Cauldron is a travesty to everything, because they undermined most of the really good messages in that, and they took away the meaning of sacrifice and the actual... it was so frustrating. That one's different, though, because that story, The Prydain Chronicles by Lloyd Alexander, is not just a fairy tale. It is fully developed, and the characters are fully developed. The story-wise, they had an entire plot plotted out, and it's not just a fairy tale. And by messing it up the way they did, that was just to me. Anyway, one interesting thing is to look at how fairy tales have developed over the world and over the years. Like, Cinderella is possibly one of the most popular stories ever. There's like this really old Greek version where this sandal gets stolen by an eagle and then dropped into this king's lap, and apparently the shoe was pretty enough that the king's like, find me the girl who wears the shoe, as if choosing a wife by her footwear was not just completely mental. Then there's the Chinese version I mentioned. There's the Charles Perrault version with the glass slippers and the fairy godmother, although the glass slippers may be a mistranslation. It might be fur slippers. Not sure on that yet. But then there's the Brothers Grimm version, where it's a lot bloodier. People's toes and heels are being chopped off, their eyes are being plucked out, and people die, and there's trees growing on their grave, throwing dresses down on people, and it's gold slippers, not glass slippers. Cinderella's a little more resourceful in that story, not depending on a godmother the whole time, and one of the reasons why I prefer that one a little bit more. More modern retellings, we've got things like Ella Enchanted, one of my favorite books of all time to this day. I read it in elementary school, and it is just great fun. Gail Carson Levine did just a really awesome job with that. Movie wasn't quite as well done, partly because I think it lost a lot of what the book had, and the character just wasn't quite as Ella. She wasn't. Yeah. Anyway, and then we have Disney's version, which has endured a lot, and it's what introduces most people to the story of Cinderella. Anyway, that is just sort of a glimpse into it. And next episode, what I will be doing is actually taking a deeper look into Cinderella, looking at the different archetypes and the motifs and everything, the different versions from around the world more closely. And I'm trying to take this in a more academic sense and everything. I won't try to make it too heavy, but I do want it to be to have actually some merit. So I'll be referencing books and versions of the story and the movies and everything, and literary works where they're talking about the stories. So I'll try to have all the references done, and I'm also going to try and have a blog going so that we can have a written version of this or something similar to it with all the references and everything. So, thanks for watching The Fairy Tale Addict, and I will talk to you later on the next one.